In the previous episode, we talked about how perceptions are reality, how perceptions shape the very material world we live in, how consciousness projects itself. But today, we will talk more about the impossible, how we continue to break the barriers, to go beyond our current paradigms. This will be more about the spirit of revolution and how us beings continue to imagine new worlds despite our limitations. Welcome, conscious colleagues, to the philosophy of power, a movement dedicated into uncovering the secrets of reality and the power of consciousness. And today, we're going to show why impossibility is the enemy of progress. Every single idea that changed the world was once called impossible. And yet, here we are. So the question isn't whether the world can change, it already has, over and over again. The question is, why is it always so hard? Here's something most people don't think about. As society grows, it needs a shared story, a common understanding of how the world works. Without it, you have chaos. Think about it. One person alone is unpredictable. Now multiply that by a million, by a billion. Society needs a common ground just to function. That shared understanding, what we call common sense, is what holds civilization together. It's written into laws, customs, institutions, and the unspoken rules of how things are done. And that's not a bad thing. Structure gives us a foundation to build upon. But here's the catch. New ideas always threaten that order. When someone comes along and says, everything you believe about this is wrong, they're not just proposing a new theory, they're threatening the coherence of an entire system people have organized their lives around. So naturally, people push back. Not out of malice, out of self-preservation. The system defends itself. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of all human epistemology. The forces that maintain order versus the forces that demand change. This tension never goes away. In every era, in every field, there are two groups. Those who uphold the current belief system and those who challenge it. Traditionalists and visionaries. Conservatives and revolutionaries. And both sides need each other. The traditionalist provides stability, a coherent framework that lets knowledge accumulate and be passed down. The visionaries provide motion. They expose the cracks in that framework and it forces them to evolve. Without structure, epistemology collapses into chaos. Without challenge, knowledge collapses into dogma. Progress lives in the tension between the two. But here's what nobody tells you when you're the one with the radical idea. The resistance you'll face isn't a sign that you're wrong. It's almost a sign that you're on to something. Let's talk about science, because most people assume science is immune to this. It's not. Science as a method is one of the greatest tools humanity has ever developed. But science as a community is still made up of people, and people carry biases. When a field becomes dominated by one framework, something dangerous happens. That framework stops being a tool and becomes a religion. New ideas aren't evaluated on their merit. They're evaluated on whether they fit the current paradigm. If they don't, they get rejected. Not because they're wrong, but because they're disruptive. This is dogma, and it has buried some of the most important discoveries in human history. However, those ideas don't end up in the soil forever. They resurface like a zombie, and when they come up, the whole world crashes down. Take Dr. Katalin Kariko. For over 2 decades, she believed that the messenger RNA, mRNA, could be used to instruct human cells to produce therapeutic proteins. The potential was enormous, but the scientific community told her it was too unstable, too inflammatory, too impractical. Now, criticizing is okay. When you put out an idea, you will rightfully so face an amount of backlash, depending how that idea is evaluated. But she did not just get criticized. She lost her funding. She was demoted at the University of Pennsylvania. Colleagues called her that crazy mRNA lady. This wasn't just criticism, this was deliberate sabotage by the community. However, her landmark paper from 2005, the one that eventually solved the core problem, was rejected by the top journals in the world. Despite this, she kept going anyway. Then COVID 19 hit, and her work became the foundation for vaccines that save hundreds of millions of lives. In 2023, she finally got the credit she deserved and received a Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. She didn't change, the world just caught up. Then there's Dr. June Almeida, a virologist in the 1960s who submitted electron microscope images of a novel virus. Images that clearly showed a distinct sphere surrounded by spike-like projections like a crown. Reviewers dismissed this as bad pictures of the flu. Those images were the first ever documentation of the coronavirus. 60 years later, when COVID 19 emerged, her foundational work allowed researchers to identify the new virus rapidly. The woman who was dismissed as incompetent had quietly laid the groundwork for one of the most critical scientific responses in modern history. Here's another one. Dr. Barbara McClintock spent the 1940s and the 50s studying maize genetics. Her data pointed to something radical. Genes could move within a chromosome. And at the time, the dominant belief was that genes were fixed and stable. Her colleagues found her work too complex, too strange. She was ridiculed, silenced at conferences, and largely ignored. In the 1970s, molecular biology confirmed everything she had found. Her discoveries of mobile genetic elements, now called transposons, revolutionized genetics. She received the Nobel Prize in 1983. And then there's Alfred Wegener, who proposed in 1912 that the continents were slowly drifting across the Earth's surface. Geologists at the time mocked him for decades. His reputation was destroyed. He died never seeing his theory validated. In 1960s, the discovery of seafloor spreading and the plate tectonics confirmed everything that he had said. His absurd idea became the foundation of modern Earth science. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Radical idea, immediate rejection, reputation destroyed, truth proven later. Field transformed. Over and over again. So what separated these people from everyone else who had a big idea and gave up? They refused to let the resistance be the final answer. Think about what that means in practice. These weren't people who faced a little pushback and stayed optimistic. They faced years and sometimes decades of institutional rejection, professional humiliation, and isolation. They had every reason to quit. But they carried something that couldn't be extinguished. Call it conviction, call it defiance, call it the refusal to let someone else define the limits of what's possible. When you truly believe in something, when you've clearly seen it, tested it, and know it to be true, that belief becomes a kind of fuel that the opposition doesn't weaken it, it sharpens it. Every rejection becomes evidence that you're threatening something real. Every dismissal becomes proof that you're not just playing it safe. The stronger the resistance, the more important the idea, the greater the power. But it's not just defiance that drives progress, it's curiosity. The hunger to keep asking, what if there's more? Not settling for the current explanation, not accepting that's just how it is. We dig deeper, keep questioning the foundations, following the question wherever it leads, even when it leads to somewhere uncomfortable. Curiosity is what opens the new space for progress. New realities become possible. But here's where it gets a bit nuanced. Because the story isn't simply structure bad, rebellion good. Structure is necessary. You cannot build a field of knowledge without it. Science is centuries of accumulated discoveries, organized into frameworks that allow researchers to build upon what came before. Without that foundation, every generation would start from scratch. The frameworks aren't the enemy, but when those frameworks stop being tools and start being walls, when the response to any new idea is an automatic dismissal based on what we already believe, then the system has turned against itself. When a community becomes so confident in its current framework that it stops genuinely engaging with challenges to it, it has replaced scientific curiosity with dogmatic certainty. It has traded the engine of discovery for the comfort of knowing. And that's when the field stops moving. The visionary's job, your job, if you carry an idea worth fighting for, is to know the rules well enough to know which ones are wrong. Not to tear down the structure for its own sake, but to see the places where the current framework stops the truth from getting through. You have to understand the box before you can break out of it. Every barrier is labeled impossible. It has one thing in common. Someone built it. And if someone built it, someone can break it. The visionaries we talked about today didn't have more talent than everyone around them. They had more conviction. They were willing to pay the price, the reputation damage, the rejection, the isolation, because they believed in what they saw. They refused to let the current system's limitations become their limitations. The current orthodoxy, in science, in business, in culture, in every field, will never stand still forever. New ideas will shake it. They always do. The only question is whether you'll be the one doing the shaking. So, don't settle for the state of things. Question it, challenge it, push against it. Because impossibility is not a fact, it's a defense mechanism. And in fact, impossibility is the enemy of progress. So carry that fire. Be the one who lights up the storm. Be the change. Be the one that shakes up the world. Thank you again for lending me your ears, my fellow conscious colleagues. This episode was rather different. We didn't talk about consciousness too much. It was more about the will to change, as I call it, the will of fire. The ability to see what currently is and keep digging. And that's what I want for all of you. Don't just settle for things. Look for the things people miss. Especially when you're in the field. Who knows? We can be seeing the next Einstein soon. The next Max Planck. The next Dr. Carico. So don't be scared to think outside the box. Don't be scared to introduce something innovative, revolutionary, creative. Because when you do, you might change the world for the better. Thank you. See you on the next episode.